Hello, and welcome to the product management demo for vendor onboarding. My name is Justin Nordeste, Senior Product Manager at Replicated, and today I'm going to walk you through the different steps to onboard your application to Replicated. So to start, we're going to go to replicated.com and click on free trial, and this is essentially going to let us set up an account. So I'll fill out some of these details here. Whoops. Okay, and I'll accept our terms and services and click Get Started. Whoops, sorry about that. Okay, so the first step here is we're going to receive an account activation email. So this will go into whichever email address you had registered. And basically, once you receive that activation number, you can just copy and paste it from the email into this activation screen. You should receive the activation code within a couple of seconds. If not, be sure to check your spam folder in case the email went to spam. So I'll go ahead and click activate here, and that'll bring us into vendor portal. So alternatively, you can also go to vendor.replicated.com and log in with your credentials there, or there's also a link to sign up for a new account. So once inside vendor portal, our first step here is going to be to create our application. It's also important to keep in mind that the name that you give here, the display name that you give here, will also be the app slug that's created. So we'll go ahead and create our application. And if you want to see those details as well, down here in settings, you can see the name, which we can edit the display name, as well as the application slug. If I come back up here to channels, essentially this is where if you wanted to create additional channels, you could. You can see here by default we start with stable, beta, and unstable. So for example, if you wanted to have an alpha program, this will be used for alpha program, you can go ahead and create that channel. So there could be lots of different use cases, lots of different reasons for channels, but just to show you that simple creation process there. So now once we're logged in, probably the next step that you'd want to do is add other members of your team. So if I come over here to team, I'll by default be brought to team members, and I can click invite member. And I simply just need to provide my teammates' email address and then an RBAC policy to apply to them. So to show you the RBAC policies really quick, if we go to RBAC, you can see that we have a couple of policies that are created by default. However, if you wanted to create your own policy, give it a name and description, you can do that as well. As far as details for that, you can read through our documentation to find different details on how to define a policy, as well as the different resource names that you can choose to provide permissions on. So coming back here, I'm also going to show us some service account tokens really quick. So some of the use cases for service account tokens could be if you had a shared script that was managed by several team members, or maybe a third-party software that integrated with vendor portal. You can go ahead and allow that. It's me. I can put this as my CI/CD software. And then you can select a policy. And then you can also choose the permissions for this policy. So this is kind of like a nice little shortcut. Essentially, if you wanted to have the same access as the policy to read and write whichever permissible entities are there, you can select that. But if you just wanted a read-only version of that policy, you could just do it as read-only as well. Now once the service account token is displayed, This is only displayed once, so we do recommend that you store this key in somewhere safe, somewhere accessible to your team, such as like a password vault or something of the sort. We'll go ahead and click close. Similarly to service account tokens, underneath your user settings under account settings, we also have individual user API tokens, which are joined to the user. So if you were to ever remove this user from your team, then that would automatically invalidate all their tokens. Similarly, you can go ahead and give that token a name and then choose whether you want it to have read write or read only. You'll see that we don't select the policy here because the user that's creating it is going to be restricted to their RBAC policy. So we'll go ahead and click create token, and we'll copy that down. So a couple of use cases for user tokens, if you might be working on something individually or if you wanted to automate part of your day-to-day and it still had to be associated with your user account, then you can go ahead and create that token for, call it your personal use. So I'll click back on applications to get back. If I did have other applications, I could access these from the drop down here. Since I only have one, it'll bring us right back to Guestbook. And essentially our next step here for a lot of our users would be to link an external registry. So you can of course use public images that might be publicly accessible, but for your software you can go ahead and link an external registry here. So you can provide an endpoint, a username and password, whether if that's something that you host locally or something that is accessible on Google or Amazon, etc. Okay, our next step here is to actually get some content in for our application. So we'll go ahead and create our first release. So I'll click create release here, and we're obviously going to walk you through this in the UI, but if you would like to manage your releases from a Git repo, you can do that as well. We have a whole set of CLI tools that are available. So you can see here we have several files that are kind of available default. You can use these as templates, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy over my application that we're using for this demo here today. And you'll see that a couple of these I've already pre-populated with some details. So now that I have my different app manifests here, you can see, essentially we can, if we wanted to make any additional changes or whatnot, we could here via the linter. What I do want to show you though is just a couple of specific details in here. So if I go underneath my config YAML, you can see that this is where I can give some specific configuration details that a user might specify during the installation. So we have a couple of basic examples in here, but if you ever wanted to, oops, sorry, that's the wrong page. If you ever wanted to add additional configurations that you would gather at time of install, you can do that. You can do that in that file here, and we have some additional details available in our documentation. In addition to that, we also have our preflights. So preflights are essentially checks that run before the application's installed. And again, if you wanted to add additional preflights, we have details available in our documentation and the open source troubleshoot project. To give you a really quick example though, if I wasn't planning to use containerd and I was planning to use Docker, I could always specify that here and then update the messages accordingly, but we're going to switch that back to containerd. And this will basically just help let you specify different details to make sure that you can check things to make sure that your installation with your customer is successful. We also have this port bundle YAML, which this allows you to essentially create and collect different logs for the support bundle. Like I mentioned as well, we do have this concept of redactors, so if there's specific details you would like to redact from the support bundles, you can as well. Essentially, these are just more details that you can fill out that'll be used later if a user were to ever generate a support bundle. And lastly, inside of our replicated app.yaml, you can see here that we do allow you to essentially customize your white label, so you can give the admin console title. In this case, we're going to call it guestbook, and you can use an icon, to be displayed there as well. Something to mention as well about the that icon. There is some details around the proper logo size and things like that. So something to keep in mind, but this way you can give it a more of a personalized experience, something that's more congruent to your organization. So now that we've gone ahead and created our release, I'm going to go ahead and save it. And then I am going to promote it. So essentially, if I wanted to, push it to a specific channel, I could do that. I'm going to just push it to every channel. In this case, and this is a demo, as well as update the version label to our first version, and I'll go ahead and click promote. And now that I've promoted, essentially that this application and this version is now available to my different channels. So our next step here would be to create a customer, but before we jump into creating a customer, I also wanted to show us our custom license fields. So essentially, this provides you the capability to specify custom fields that would be within the license. So for example, if I wanted a field called CRM ID, might be Salesforce.com ID number, I can go ahead and specify that, and we'll see when I go and create a customer how we can go ahead and use these details. So I'll go ahead and create that field here. As well too, if if you have an existing licensing system or a license that might be used by the application, that's also something you could have as a customer specific field. So I can type something here like, let's see. Oops. And maybe this one's a string. And maybe this is something we want to hide from the user. Maybe it's something that we don't. We'll just leave it unchecked and not have it hidden. Actually, speaking of which, we could probably unhide the customer ID as well. Typically, customers know their own identification number as well as their licenses if they used to have any legacy licenses or things like that. So now that we've created our license field, I'll go over here into customers, and we'll go ahead and create our first customer. Now, depending on your contract with Replicated, some fields may or may not be available here. So we'll just call this some big bank. You can select an assigned channel for them. We'll go ahead with stable. And I can also choose a customer type. So for this demo, I'm going to go ahead and click paid. Having said that, community licenses are something that common asks from our vendors, but is something that's available at a different license level, as well as if you wanted the user to be able to have a license that does not expire. And you can see here under custom fields, I can put in my details. So maybe their license number was something like that. I'm sorry, their customer ID was something like 101, and their license was for ABCD. Oops. Lastly, we do also have kind of per license options available for whether or not the user wants to download or being able to download an air-gap package and use GitOps and allow our COT snapshot capabilities. Once we're all set, we can go ahead and click Save Changes. And essentially at this point, you'd be ready to go to install with your customer. Now there's probably documentation that you're going to provide your customers for your application prior to installing with them. The important part here is that if the customer is connected or if they're able to access the internet, if they were installing into an existing Kubernetes cluster, they could use this simple command down here. If they're not installing into an existing Kubernetes cluster and they're going to be using a provided Kubernetes cluster, we can do that through the embedded cluster option here. If we come down to Kubernetes installer, you can see how the existing installer that's here. If I were to view the YAML for that, you can see that we're using the open source curl project, and you can see the different add-ons that are here. So we do have documentation available for curl as well, and you can see how curl basically allows users to easily select different add-ons to install with Kubernetes. And we have a whole list of add-ons that are available. So if there was a specific add-on that you wanted to be installed with curl, and if it's part of our supported add-ons, we can install that for you and essentially make it part of that single install command. Lastly, if your customer, we'll go back to the customer here. If your customer is going to be installing in an air-gapped environment where they do not have access to the to the internet rather, you can see here that we provide a download portal. So I'm going to go ahead and generate a new password. This is essentially a one-time use password that we can use here. And if you'd like to copy the URL, or you can click this link just to download that portal. You can see that the portal is also white labeled as well with our image in the title of our app. And I'll go ahead and just paste that one-time use password in here. And similarly for the online installs, if they have an existing cluster or if they're doing a curl embedded cluster, they can choose from these options here and download the associated bundles. This way they don't have to be connected at all to the internet. They can be, as you guessed, fully air-gapped for their installation. So with that, I want to thank you for joining me during this demo, and I look forward to my colleague showing you the other capabilities of Replicated in our subsequent demos. Take care.